Our next recipe, we're making sliders using beef. And again, in terms of, we wanted to highlight here that in general, eating a plant-based diet is definitely recommended. So when I'm talking about plant-based diet, the first thing that comes to a lot of people's minds is vegetables, fruit, but just knowing that plant-based foods like nuts, seeds, beans like chickpeas, kidney beans, these are all part of it as well. And it's not to say that you should never have any type of animal-based foods like beef or poultry or fish. You do need that, right? It has protein, lots of important nutrients and vitamins. But we wanted to talk about the safety of using red meats like beef, pork, veal, lamb, okay? And really making sure that you're using leaner cuts. Okay, and also for those red meats that you're not having more than 500 grams per week. So what's 500 grams? So if you take a look at your palm, about the size, roughly, it's about 100 grams. So 5 of those per week, okay, is about 500 grams. And again, choosing those leaner cuts, right, will have less fat. So again, you really want to make sure that you're not putting the meat that's higher in fat on the flame, because again, that grilling process increases the potential risk for those cancer-causing compounds, which in turn change the structure of DNA that might lead to the formation of cancer cells. Okay, so again, Jeremy's going to walk us through some tips on how to barbecue beef safely.
Yes. Okay. So. Like Stephanie mentioned, we're going to do beef burgers today. If you don't like beef, you can use chicken, you can use turkey. If you want to go completely vegetarian, even replace it with like black beans or like kidney beans, that would work too.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But today, we want to focus on beef and how can we sort of transition it to make it, a little bit healthier, and we're going to be using a few different vegetables and whole grains in this.
Yeah, so I challenged him to say, could we do a half and half, right? Can we have a little bit of red meat that was lean, but load up on those vegetable and those plant-based foods as well. So the challenge was accepted in order to make it delicious, of course.
Yeah, for sure. And there's probably, I know there's a lot of burger purists out there and barbecue purists. You have your way, absolutely. This is just maybe an alternative, and you can give it a try. We wanted to focus on mushrooms because mushrooms do have some of the same flavor components as meat and as beef. It doesn't taste exactly like it, but it does actually contribute to it. So we're going to get into this. It's my favorite topic is it's high in a flavor called umami. It's one of our 5 tastes. So we have sweet, salty, sour, bitter, and then umami. Who's heard of umami before? All right, some of you, most of you. Can anyone yell out what that means? Umami? Savory. Yeah. It's like sort of savory, like
You've
sort
been
of mouth-watering. Yeah, I do talk about it a lot. But mushrooms are usually in high concentration of that. A lot of fermented foods, aged cheeses, and meats are very high in umami. So when we want to replace meat, or at least cut into it, choosing some of those ingredients that are high in that savoriness and that umami means that we're still going to have an enjoyable dish, still going to taste really good, and we're probably not going to miss it as much. And maybe we'll convert some of those burger curists out there. So I'm going to start off with some mushrooms, and any mushrooms that you want, I'm just kind of breaking them up to smaller pieces by hand. So I have cremini and white button. Those are like the most common ones that you'll see. But you can use any mushrooms in here. And I could chop them up by hand. That would take some time. Or if you have a food processor, that just makes it a lot faster. So I'm going to throw it into the food processor, and I'm just going to plug it in. First step. And then we're going to just pulse it. And we just want to break it down so that it's almost like a similar size to the ground meat that we're adding it to. Okay? So that's what it looks like there. So I'm gonna add this. Now, the thing with mushrooms that you do want to keep in mind is they are mostly water. So when making these, I might say it a couple times, when making these, either make them right away. You can refrigerate them for up to about 5 hours. Beyond that, a lot of water is going to start to come out of the mushrooms, and it's going to make them a little soggy, and then might make them fall apart. Or, if you didn't want to make them right away, you can freeze them directly from raw, and then throw them onto the grill when you're ready to use them.
So you mean the burger or
the burger? No, the burger.
Lunch? Okay, so already pre-made patty.
Yeah, make the patty. Just because there's a lot of water in this. If you wanted to do an extra step and actually cook the mushrooms down a bit in the pan to release some of the water, you can do that as well. I'm just trying to make it as quick as possible. So there we go. There's the mushrooms, already pulsed, ready to go. To that, we want to add some other flavor. So I have some green onion. Any onion would be good. We're going to add sun-dried tomatoes. Also very high in umami. You can all say it together. Very high
and
in
also
umami.
lycopene, yes,
And
the
lycopene.
phytonutrient, yes. Yeah.
Some sun-dried tomatoes in there, and to also help to bulk it up a little bit, we're going to add bulgur to this. Now, if you haven't cooked with bulgur before, it's a great whole grain to use, and it's very, very easy to cook. In the brackets on your recipe, kind of give you just a short little sentence there. So it's half a cup of dried to 2 cups of boiling water. You just cover it with like plastic wrap in a bowl and let it sit for like 10-15 minutes.
It says 1 cup though.
Yeah, so 2 to 1. So half a cup to 1 cup. So 2 to 1, whatever that is. And you're gonna get this nice fluffy whole grain bulgur. Delicious. So we're gonna add some of that as well. That's gonna help to bulk everything up. Okay, and then for some more flavor, we're gonna add some Worcestershire sauce.
That thing.
You guys can try that at home. I almost heard myself say it. I won't do it again. And then this is optional. This is mushroom powder. So how do we get to mushroom powder? We take dried mushrooms. Have you seen dried mushrooms in the store? Shiitake, porcini, whatever it is. And then in a food processor, just pulse them. Or if you have like a spice grinder, you can pulse them until it's like a powder. And because they're dried, they will break down really, really easily. And this is another good way to add yes, thank you. Umami. And it's going to add a lot more mushroom flavor. This is a mushroom dish, so I'm going to just jam-pack with mushroom. This is optional. You don't have to do this, but we want to make these taste good for sure. Now, I'm going to mix this together at this point. I don't actually want to add the meat yet, and I will tell you why in a second. So once this is combined, oh, I didn't, maybe just a little pinch of salt. Again, we don't need to add too much. Black pepper. And a little bit of oil to this as well. Now, because we're adding oil, I mean, it's not a lot of fat for all of this mixture, but it is important to keep in mind the smoking point, like Stephanie mentioned. So if you are going to use an oil, use one that tends to have a higher smoking point, and I listed a couple there. So grapeseed oil and avocado oil are ones that do have generally a higher smoking point. So those ones are a little bit better to cook with. Again, you still want to be mindful of the heat. General rule of thumb is if that oil, whether you're sauteing or stir frying or doing anything in a pan, if it starts to smoke, you do want to start over again because that's at that point where it's already burned. Okay, so the veggie mixture is done. So that's half. And then the rest of the burger, half, is just a lean ground beef. Yeah. And again, you can use whatever meat you want to for this.
Yeah.
So I'm going to add this to the beef. And
especially just generally when you're cooking with raw meats, you want to make sure that there's no cross-contamination. So, you know, if you're using something that has the raw meat, any utensils or plates that you're using, you don't want to cross-contaminate that with something that is cooked. So just really making sure that you're separating the two, okay?
Yes.
Because you want to reduce that risk of any type of food poisoning, foodborne illnesses. The bacteria, right, is something that is raw, really something to be cautious of, especially in the grilling time season. You know, you might be using lots of plates and I want to call it a flipper.
Utensils, spatula,
Spatula.
flippers. And you put those on your feet.
Right, but you flip. It's an action of flipping.
So I'm mixing together. I put some gloves on just so I'm not making a mess. But the thing that we want to remember, and this is just going back to like burger purists, is I do not want to crush the meat. Okay, and this is for if I'm using chicken, beef, turkey, any of the ground meats that you do get. You'll notice this sort of like the ground strands. The more I compact this together, the tougher it's actually going to be. It's going to actually make it a little bit chewy. So what I want to do is I'm almost gently kind of, almost like if you're like, I guess, massaging somebody's head. I don't know if that's the greatest comparison, but
So you don't want to like squish it.
You don't want to pull their hair out. Yeah. You just want to be gentle and mix everything together, but I'm kind of like pulling it apart too. I don't want to crush it. And that's just going to mean that it's going to be a little bit more tender, a little bit juicier. It's just going to be much more pleasant.
Would you put it in the
food processor?
Yes.
I wouldn't do that either, because that's the same thing. We're kind of macerating, and we're creating almost like this tough structure.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So just kind of want to gently mix it together. And then once everything is pretty well combined, then you can sort of grab a little bit of a handful and just kind of gently form the patty. So again, I'm not crushing it, I'm not pushing it too much with a hand, I'm just kind of rolling it around, and then I'll press it gently and then kind of bring around the outside. Now you see I didn't need to add an egg for this. Did this recipe, when we tested this recipe, it actually stayed intact beautifully. It's because there's not a lot of wet ingredients in here. Like I mentioned, if I let this sit for longer than 5 hours, it will start to get wet because of the mushroom. So either ready to go or freeze. So you can start it on sort of a medium heat, nothing too high, and about a minute per side just to get a little bit of color, and then move it, transition it to the side that doesn't have heat. Still need heat on one side, but transition to the side that doesn't have heat and cook it that way.
Other options, if you wanted, although this kind of, you do have to be careful in terms of food safety and cooking temperature, is to kind of bake for most of the time in an oven and then transfer it to the grill. Either way, I do recommend making sure that you have a food thermometer and that you're checking that internal temperature before eating.
Yeah. One more tip, full of tips today, is it's always a good idea to stay near the barbecue anytime you're cooking. It tends to be the time you walk away that you start to have flare-ups. And if you can, this is just a suggestion, works really well, is get a bottle. You can get them like at the dollar store, those little like squirt bottles, those spray bottles, and fill it with water. Or you can fill it with like a little bit of water and lemon, or like a little bit of balsamic vinegar, whatever, and have that near the barbecue. Anytime you do see flare-ups, you just use that squirt bottle to sort of tame it, kick it back down, because that's what we want to do. We want to make sure that those flare-ups don't come up. If it's a flavorful water, you're even sort of like
adding
seasoning,
flavor.
your food as you go. So it's always a really nice idea. Okay, so while these are cooking away, they smell really good. I did some ahead of time, so I'm going to plate them. And this is where it's completely up to you. We have some of these like neat little buns here. They're very flat. And so this is what the burgers look like. so they stay really nice intact.
So we're using a whole grain. Again, making sure that we have more whole grains in the diet as opposed to those refined grains.
Yeah.
Getting more fiber and those antioxidant properties as well.
Yeah, and then whatever condiments you like. This is sort of our made-up secret sauce that we just invented yesterday, which is just a little bit of yogurt and sour cream and some pickly things.
He's not going to share it.
No, I'll share it. I'll share it. All right, so a little bit of that on top, and then if you want some tomato, again, whatever you like, whatever you fancy. We're going to keep it pretty simple, but that is the mushroom beef burger.
Yeah. And there you have it, an easy way to limit your intake of red meat, remembering those 500 grams per week, and using kind of a lower fat option and adding in those plant-based foods. In this recipe, we use the mushrooms, the sun-dried tomatoes, and the bulgur to boost up the plant-based content.
Yeah. All right. So,
there we have it.
Mushroom beef burgers. Any questions? Yeah.